Welcome to the Macworld Podcast. I'm Roman Loyola here with Jason Cross.
Good morning.
And Michael Simon.
Hello, sir.
iPhone battery problems seem like something everyone has, so we thought it'd be a good idea to talk about it on this show. Today's episode was brought about by a recent article that Mike wrote about his iPhone battery. So I thought we'd talk about what he encountered, and then we're going to talk about general things about iPhone battery life, maybe some best practices, some settings you should fiddle with, maybe some misconceptions even. So that's what we're going to cover on today's show. Let's talk about Mike's article. Mike, you have an iPhone 15 Pro Max?
I do.
Yeah.
As do I.
I have an iPhone 14 Pro Max, so I'm one generation behind you guys.
What's your battery health? Since that's what we're talking about.
So actually,
yours is a year old.
It's a year old.
Maybe even like 18 months old at this point, right?
Yeah. And my iPhone battery health is at 95%.
See,
I was
that's
kind of surprised.
With how many cycles?
Right. How many cycles?
Well, so here's the thing. I don't think I can see the cycles on the I keep saying iPhone 14 Pro Max. Can I?
Oh, yeah, I think you're right. I think it's only an iPhone. Maybe it's only an iPhone 15 thing. They changed it. With the iPhone 15, they changed like the expected life of those cycles, so maybe it's only measurable on that.
That data's there. It's not in the menu. You have to. There's a good.
I have to get a third-party app, right?
There's a shortcut called like battery stats. Look for it in the shortcuts app. You know how they have so you can search for public shortcuts. There's a shortcut called battery stats that will dump out all that info for you.
Okay.
So that's pretty handy if anybody's got a prior to iPhone 15, and it will list all kinds of info. But yeah, so mine is at 119 cycles and 99%.
Wow, that's pretty good.
And Mike, what was yours at?
Mine was at 92%.
And how many cycles?
How many cycles do you have, Jason?
119.
What the hell am I doing with my phone? I'm at 270. Well, actually, the article is at 270. I'm probably close to 300 now.
You're just draining it and charging it more.
But why?
I don't know why. I don't know. Are you?
What am I doing with my life?
You
I'm
may
at
have
282.
The brightness up a lot.
No, I keep it really low. I mean, so I do. All right. So my son plays baseball, and I record a lot of his games. So that drains it. Obviously, it's streaming.
Yeah.
So that could be one of the reasons, but certainly not 180's worth.
That's one. The other is
so much.
Well, the other is this isn't since launch. I was using a regular Pro for a while, and then it switched to a Pro Max. So this is kind of minus a couple of months since launch.
All right. So that
yeah,
if you're
better. Recording video, and especially if you're streaming it live and not just recording
that's
it
what
storage.
We do. And it's only in the summer months, but it's like a couple times a week.
That'll you probably get 2 charges out of that day.
Yeah, maybe.
But 92% is not terrible, but it's a little low.
No, it's not terrible, but it's I
lower
was
than
surprised.
You'd expect for that.
Yeah, because Apple says 80%. After 80%, like start worrying that you're gonna really notice like a degradation.
But you're supposed to go 500 cycles or more before you get to 80%.
Yeah,
and most people go a lot more. Usually,
the iPhone 15. So that was before the iPhone 15. Now they say 1,000 cycles to get to 80%. That's the new for the new phone.
But it's not linear. You're not. That doesn't mean at 500 cycles you're at 90%. It's not. That's not how it works. But generally speaking, if you've had your phone for a year, if you're over 90%, you're okay. If you're over 95%, it's really good. And the people who've had their phones and have just been using them normally for like 2 or 3 years, and they're like, mine's at 95%.
Right.
I don't know what you're doing, but good on you. That's resale value right there.
Yeah, it does. And listen, they like we were talking to someone in the Macworld room that says like, oh, my battery's at 98%. Like it, as Jason says, like you might be listening to this, check out your battery health. All right, so we'll tell you how to find it. You go into your iPhone settings, then go to battery. It's on, it's one of those on the left-hand side. It's its own tab. click on battery health, and inside there you'll see a couple of different stats. It'll be battery health. Will say normal. It should say normal if you have a newer phone. Maximum capacity, which is what we're talking about. The cycle count, which is how many times you've charged from. Is that any charge, or is that it's got to be a certain amount that you're charging for that thing to tick up? I would assume. Let me see what it says.
Yes, it has to. It's the amount that's like used up your battery's capacity, right? So it's like, it's kind of like,
I see.
I may be oversimplifying it, but it's like if you drained your battery to 50%, charged it, and drained it 50% again, that would be one cycle.
That's
like
one.
It's used
That's kind of what they're explaining here. Yeah,
the capacity of your battery once over.
And you can also change. Well, all right. So we'll get into all that stuff when we talk about tips and stuff. So that's where you can see your battery health. Now, this whole battery health thing came into play. What, 8 years ago, 6 years ago with Battery Gate. So it was people were discovering that their iPhone, I think it was the iPhone 6S or 6 or 6S, that was performing slower than usual. Like it had been noticeably like laggy, and it became a thing where people were talking about it online. And then Apple responded as like, what we're doing is we're lowering the performance of the processor, throttling your phone, so your battery lasts longer. And people just flipped out.
It wasn't. I'm gonna be a little pedantic here. It wasn't so that your battery lasts longer. It was because as your battery's peak capacity goes down, especially those batteries they were using at the time, as the peak capacity goes down some, it's not able to deliver as much voltage at once.
Yep.
And so when your processor would crank up to its maximum speed, it would require a certain amount of voltage from the battery. And if the battery couldn't deliver that, your phone would crash.
Right.
So in order to prevent crashes, they
unexpected
lowered
shutdowns is what Apple called it.
Yeah. That's like when rockets blow up and they say rapid unscheduled disassembly, right? So they were, in order to stop people's phones from crashing, they were just limiting the peak power, the peak performance of your processor, so they wouldn't draw more voltage than the battery could provide on an old battery, right? So it wasn't about trying to stretch out your battery life. It was just about trying to stop crashes and stuff, because people didn't understand how batteries work. Since then, they've had all these battery health stats and all.
Yeah. So after that whole thing, there was a lawsuit. People freaked out. Apple agreed to replace all of the batteries that had dropped below 80% in their battery health. Now, previously, Apple could see that information, but we couldn't. And I might be wrong here, maybe it was iOS 14. Is that right, Jason?
I don't remember when they started putting some health.
Yeah, so they let the customers see the battery health. It was a big deal at the time.
Yep.
And that was when this whole thing came to be a thing that people paid attention to.
They also started to sort of, in the background, engineer their phones so that the peak voltage draw wasn't more than the battery could supply as it started to age. Like, it was harder to cross that threshold of, and there's new power control circuitry. I mean, they've been working on these things constantly forever. There's always new battery chemistries and control circuitry and all this other kind of stuff. But then on the iPhone 15, they gave us another control, which is back in settings in that battery menu, there's a charging menu. And it lets you enable a thing called clean energy charging. I'll explain that in a second. And then optimize battery charging, which lets you, it limits your phone to, it looks at your usage patterns and then says, hey, if they're not going to need to use a lot of their battery, we think over the next however many hours, we're going to stop charging at 80%. And then, of course, you can also force it to never charge past 80%. There's a little menu in there to do that. The clean energy charging thing is a feature where like you plug in your phone for hours, like it's overnight or whatever, and it's gonna look at some data from power companies and stuff and say, hey, when is the power supply from the cleanest sources? Like when are we not using coal peaker plants and stuff like that in your area? And we're going to charge your phone during those times when the energy supply is from cleaner sources. It will never not charge your phone when it thinks you might need it. This is only, it looks at usage patterns, and it's not going to delay charging in the middle of the day when you're obviously using your phone a lot. It's going to do these things when you plug it in for long periods.
That was a iOS 16.1 feature, I guess about a year ago, maybe a little more.
You should probably you won't notice anything. It's more like, hey, I plugged my phone in at 7, and at 7 we're still using a bunch of gas peaker plants, and it's just gonna wait till 10:30 when we're no longer.
That was another feature that created a bit of a stir online because people thought Apple was, I don't even know what, but it became a thing for a couple of weeks, and then people forgot about it again.
Green anything causes a bit of a stir, but also people were worried that
it was on by default. Apple didn't, like, you had to turn it off rather than turn it on. So people don't, and they don't love when things are turned on that they don't necessarily.
I think everybody was worried that it wouldn't charge at a time they needed it to charge, and that's proven to pretty much not be the case, like ever. There's a new feature in iOS 18 for people who have iPhone 15s, which are the only ones, 15 or 15 Plus, any USB-C iPhone. Those are the ones that give you the opportunity to force an 80% limit on your phone. You can adjust that in 5% increments from between 80, 85, 90, 95, or 100.
That's an iOS 18 feature.
That's an iOS 18, new iOS 18 thing. Which I love, because 80 always felt like a little low to me, but I did want to limit mine. So like you get the ability to do 90, and I feel a lot better about that. I feel a lot better looking at my phone, my fresh new phone, and it's not like at 75% by noon.
Yeah.
So
I ran the shortcut while you guys are talking.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it says here that my cycle count is 946.
That seems
wow.
That seems about right.
And then, well, here's the thing: relative to when it was new, your battery capacity is 79.74%. But my
your battery health says like 90 something.
My battery maximum capacity here says 95%.
Well, unless you're charging your phone 2+ times a day, I can't imagine you're at 900 after a year and a half or so. That seems insanely high.
Yeah,
it does seem insanely high.
Those stats may not be using the same terminology as what you see on the battery screen,
right?
They're just from the log.
That could be every time you plugged in your phone for any reason.
How many times have you plugged this in to charge? Not how many times have you charged a full battery's worth of charge.
So one thing that I've always wondered, and this is kind of, I guess, a segue into like a general discussion, is what equates one cycle? What is the definition of a cycle?
We just talked about that a second ago. So Apple basically defines it as 100%. If it's 10% over 10 days, that's one cycle. If it's 50% and 60%, that's one cycle plus a little bit.
Yeah, there may be some wiggle room there, but the text for cycle count from on the main battery screen from Apple is, this is the number of times iPhone has used your battery's capacity. Right. So like, how many times have you depleted a capacity worth? That could be 80%, or something, who knows exactly. But that's different than what the cycle count you might see when running that shortcut, which basically reads the log that they save in the background, like the big complicated. There's no like industry standard for what a cycle is.
Right. That's why I wanted to bring it up. Yeah. Because
you'll see this talked about all the time, but it's like, driving your electric car down from 100% to 20% and then plugging it in and charging it back up to 100%. Is that a cycle? Or is that not quite a cycle yet until you use 20% more?
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know. Or charge 20% more. Like everyone's kind of got a little bit different way to define it.
Yeah. Or like, say, for instance, you charge from 60% to 80% over 5 days. So that equals one cycle based on
like
the
if you
definition.
use 20% each for each day for 5 days, is that, I think that is how Apple would define it. And it's not the amount you charge, it's the amount you use. But yeah, if your battery dropped 20% each day for 5 days, that would be one full cycle worth. We should probably just give people tips about what causes your battery's capacity to degrade faster. They all are going to degrade over time. That is a fundamental aspect of rechargeable lithium-ion battery technology. It's how it works. But the general tips that they give people is there are different battery chemistries out there. What the anode's made out of. There's some are nickel metal cobalt, some are lithium iron phosphate. There's and they behave differently. But generally speaking, fully charging your battery and leaving it at a high state of charge over 80% for a prolonged period of time is bad for the long-term health of your battery. It causes each side of the anode and cathode of your battery are separated by a little plastic separator, and the lithium ions move between them.
Back and forth,
go back and forth as you charge and discharge and stuff. And then it causes, it's almost like imagine you have a dish sponge that's slightly damp, right? And then you pour more water into it. It expands some. It's not going to blow up like 8 times, but it expands and contracts. Plus the heat makes it expand and contract. Just the resistance causes heat as electricity moves, just like heat going through anything, like electricity going through anything causes heat. So those things cause the structure of those things to start to degrade. You get little dendrils inside and stuff like that, and then it's not going to hold as much energy over time. So the 2 tips everyone has is don't get it too hot, or 3 tips. Don't get it too hot. Don't charge it up fully and leave it fully charged a lot, and don't drain it almost fully and leave it drained a lot. Those are the main things. So you could say stay between 80 and 20 if you wanted to be really oversimplistic about it. But what, am I going to only use 60% of my battery for the rest of my life? No,
that's the thing. Apple promotes like the ease of MagSafe, and if I'm at my desk, I just throw it on my charger. I don't even look a lot of the times at what I'm at. And then like my car has a wireless charging mat, and I'll throw it on there all the time, and I'll pick it up, and I'm like, oh, whoa, this is because it's you got the engine under there, and they like it's hot. Oh. So that's probably messing with it as well.
That may not be why it gets hot because of the engine, but it gets hot because the coils are like that.
Maybe,
and like
whatever it is,
like
but
that.
It definitely gets hotter there.
But it definitely gets hot.
Than any other charger I use.
Cars are hot, like dashboards are hot, like but yeah, so you'll see this. Electric cars is the perfect example of something that it's a huge battery. It cycles a lot. You get less range over time. So they automatically, sort of their default is to limit you to like 80, 85% charge. And then when you're going to take a road trip, you're like, okay, charge me up to 100, right?
I have 80% charging limit on my phone.
Yep.
And still. So, by the way, Roman, I ran that test. I got 276, and my phone says 282, so it was pretty accurate for me.
You're pretty close.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wild differences.
I don't know.
So I guess what I would say to people is using the charge limit, especially the smart charge limit, where it just kind of automatically limits to 80 if it doesn't think it just looks at your usage patterns, and that's a good idea. But don't feel like you can never charge it to 100 if you feel like you're really going to use it all that day.
Sure.
And the same thing with going below 20 or 20 or 30. Don't freak out if you go between like, oh, I need a charger right now. The harm is if I drained my phone down to 15% and put it in a drawer for 2 weeks and left it at 15%. That's the real harm. Like every day it goes low and you charge it up again. That shouldn't be causing problems.
Yeah, mine regularly gets down to like 6. You know, although I'm like maybe I shouldn't talk since my battery health is down to 92%.
Yeah,
but
that might be part of the reason why is because you drain it so low so often because you're filming video and stuff. So we talked about heat. Heat is a major one, and that's one reason why when you plug into charge or charge in any way, it will fast charge up to like 50%, and then it starts slowing down a lot.
Right.
And between 80 and 100, it's really slow because as you get more energy, as more of that energy gets all onto one side, all onto the cathode side, on the anode side, it's you don't want to keep blasting in energy really fast. You're going to make it worse. So that's just bad for the long-term health. So that's why the chargers manage that stuff. But if you're charging somewhere where it's hot, plugged, wireless, whatever, charging in your hot car, like you hop in your car after it's been sitting in the parking lot, it's 100 degrees in your car, and then you plug in to charge. Like that's the kind of thing that's not great for your phone's battery health. And that's where we get to, should you be charging wirelessly? It's a weird double-edged thing. One, it's slow, and that's good. Slow charging is good for the health of your battery. But wireless charging also heats up the whole back of your phone. Any inductive charging, it's just a big coil. It's a big magnetic coil and another big magnetic coil on the charger. And alternating currents, alternating magnetic waves create current in the coil, and that's how they get, and that causes heat. So inductive charging pads, some get hotter than others. It's just a matter of how much resistance is in the coil and how do they have any kind of active cooling and all kinds of, there's
the
differences.
Apple's failed AirPower. That's why it didn't come out, was because they couldn't figure out how to keep it from getting too hot, because they had like 30 coils or 20 something coils in there. Yeah, you could put everything ever. Like it's not something that is just, this works. And if you buy a $10 charging pad from Amazon from some company that you never heard of, it could be doing more damage than you think.
Right, and or even expensive ones. It's true. Just I mean, it really comes down to like how hot is it getting your phone? Is if your phone's going to charge, because it's charging slowly, if it's going to take an hour to charge up, and that spends that entire hour hot, sitting on a hot charging pad, like your whole battery, your whole phone being hot, the whole battery being hot, that's probably being worse than plugging in the USB-C cable and charging it fast.
Right. But, when people buy a new iPhone, like that's one of the things that are like, oh, this is so cool. And Apple doesn't make a dock. They don't make a stand. They make this, I got one right here, this terrible cable.
Puck.
Yeah.
Very short cable.
So you almost have to buy a third-party one, and there's no guidance on it whatsoever.
And there's no
trusted brands that make $10 ones and $100 ones. And like, well, I don't want to spend $100. I'll buy this one, and you end up doing more harm than good.
And it's almost impossible to really test this because, like, there's no way to consistently have like the same amount of charge draw to find out which one's getting hotter and how hot is too hot. And it would take you a year to do a bunch of charge cycles just to find out, like, is this one harming my battery more? Like, there's no real good way to test. So, I mean, use trusted brands. Be wary of those ones that are every car's got them now. And sometimes they're just slapping in. It's about it being cheap. It's
that's
about
what I was just saying before.
Good.
I use it, and I tell you, my phone gets so much hotter there than anywhere else.
Yeah, and sometimes it's about it looking good or something, and so they're not. It's coils that have a lot of resistance and they get really hot, or it's just in a hot car. So that's my charging tips. Is plugging in is almost always good because Apple has very good power regulation circuitry for the USB-C port.
Yeah.
They are going to manage for themselves and be able to tell the charger, especially if you have a USB-C iPhone, they're going to be able to tell the charger, give me this much juice, give me this much voltage, give me this much amperage, through several different steps using the USB-C charging protocols. And they're going to be able to manage how much goes into the battery, and they're going to sense the temperature and all the good stuff, right? They're going to manage it very well. You can slap it on a wireless charger, but yet watch out for heat. Just heat is the killer, no matter how you're charging it.
I've had people ask me if they should charge their phone with the case on it. And I always tell them, well, does it make your iPhone hot when you're charging it? If it does, then take off the case. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. Like you said, Jason, before, there is a point where you might be overthinking it a little bit.
Yeah. But it is true that you're putting a hunk of plastic between the wireless charging coils, like more distance between them. That means it can impact the charging speed, but it can also mean that they're getting hotter, or if it's not necessarily getting hotter, it could just be the same hot longer. That's not good either. So yeah.
But like 95% of iPhone users are doing that.
Yeah, they have a case, and you just slap it on there.
And no one's taken it out of their case to charge. I mean, who's doing that? So
nobody.
Yeah.
I don't. I
don't even have a case. My battery's down to 92%. But
I've been a case user, and I'm running without a case now as a thing. But I use wireless charging a lot.
Of course.
But I have
one
good
in
literally
every room. Every room has a wireless charger somewhere.
Yeah. And I put mine. I don't charge my phone all day, but I just slap it on the charger at night. I just put it on my little dock thing. It's not magnetic for what it's worth. It's not a MagSafe charger. So it's not doing the higher charging rate, and it doesn't have any magnetic interference. It's just leaning up against
mine's one of
5-watt Qi charger, but it doesn't going to be overnight.
Where you can, but it's not MagSafe certified.
Right, so it's not doing the 7.5 watt, the higher speed. Yeah. So
I tend to use wired charging most of the time. I charge I charge overnight, and then I often charge once in the afternoon, mostly because I play Pokemon Go, and that kills your battery.
Sure does.
So you are doing so. That 900 is probably accurate.
So it's probably accurate, I walk my dog and I play Pokemon Go, and that kills your battery. So.
Honestly, I'm going to tell you, I did not know Pokemon Go was still a thing that was like updated.
It's not a thing anymore. I'm the only one doing it.
But it
is updated.
Exists.
Yeah. They're still players. It's just not like a global phenomenon.
No.
Crazy.
So,
now your 900 makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and sometimes, and I will use the charger in my car, and that's a wireless charger. But when I charge in the afternoon, it's usually because my battery's down to I want to have some. I want to top it off a little bit before I go on my walk with my dog for like an hour and a half. So, and then I charge it overnight. Most of the time it's wired. I do have a MagSafe charger that I use when I'm working remotely, that I carry with me, and I use that. So,
like the little puck thing, you mean?
Yeah, it's a MagSafe charger. But it's
we can just say, I know everybody kind of wants the magic bullet for how do I keep my battery health good all the time, and I wish there was something. I wish there was one thing that you just knew would work for everyone, but there's so many chargers and there's so many variables, and so the best hint I can say is don't be at a really low state of charge for a long time. Don't keep your phone at a really high state of charge for a long time, and don't let it get real hot a lot. Don't let it while you're charging. Like charging while hot is bad. That's kind of the global true of all rechargeable batteries kind of advice, right?
Yeah.
Slow charging tends to be better, but like what we've seen out of Apple's USB-C charging, like their battery management is plugging in the USB-C and just letting it go as fast as it wants to go seems to be just great. It seems to not really mess anybody up.
Yeah, and you're gonna get, so if you're down to 30% and you plug it in with like a 20 watt charger, it's gonna be at like 50 in like 10 minutes or 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Whereas if you throw it on a wireless charger, it's gonna take twice as long. So it is better. It's just so convenient just to pop it on a wireless charger. I mean, that's what it's there for.
I do it all the time.
Taking the plug out, even just putting the thing in, like it's annoying.
Yeah.
If you want to make your battery last longer, I don't mean its longevity. I mean a single charge. If you want to make a single charge last longer, kind of without totally changing how you use your phone, the best thing you can do is just lower your brightness a little bit.
Yes, and take off adaptive. So I learned that lesson at a baseball game a couple years ago. I had adaptive brightness on, and it was outside, obviously, and the thing shot up to like 98%. And I'm like, well, why did this last 45 minutes? Because it was like that display, when it's super bright and it's real sunny, it looks great, but it is killing your battery.
Yeah, it will crank up to 1,200 nits, and you can read it in the bright sun, but
it's amazing.
It will. If you are, as you said, like shooting video, you've got the screen on the whole time.
Right.
It will.
So now I shut it off and I bring it down to nothing. I lower the brightness to 0.
For a regular, you're out in the bright sun, you're going to check your phone, do a thing for a second, put it back away. It's fine. Leave it on. Just it's a long periods of time. But just in general, brightness kills your thing. There's all this other stuff like using millimeter wave cellular. People aren't doing that much, but that is a big battery drain. Things like playing high-end 3D games,
maps,
stuff like
streaming music and video, all that stuff.
But those are all like, what am I going to do? Not use my phone? Like it's that's what it's there for. People used to obsess about turning off Bluetooth every time they're not Bluetoothing. It's not like that anymore. The Bluetooth chips and radios and stuff like that in there are extremely efficient now. You're not going to save a lot turning off Bluetooth. Just kind of
and you don't need to quit apps. My wife still does this. She turns she shuts her phone, and she goes and she quits all of her. You don't need to do that. In fact, you're probably using more battery, because when you relaunch that app, it's got to reload everything.
Yep.
So you're technically probably using a little bit more.
They're basically being dehydrated. It's dumping everything that's in RAM for that app off off to the SSD and just kind of freezing it. So it's really not using anything. And if you open that app up again a lot, you are probably doing worse. But if you change your using habits so much just to save a little battery, then you're just ruining the point of having your phone.
That's true. That's the biggest thing. Yeah.
The thing that won't change your habits so much is just tweak the brightness down a little bit.
Yeah. And honestly, the Apple has such great displays that you can keep the brightness at like the lower third, and it's still really bright and really legible and really good.
They do a really good job of accounting for the way the colors shift as your brightness goes down and stuff, so that it still looks right and everything. They do a good job.
Yeah. Is low power mode worth using, even if you're not?
Ooh.
I mean, the idea of low power mode is you turn it on when you're at a low percentage of your battery life.
Yeah, and you need your battery to last longer. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it a strategy to use if, like, say you're gonna be out, you won't be near a charger? Is it an option to help save your battery during that time?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes away some of those modern conveniences like push email and things like that. But yeah, absolutely. Same thing with your watch. If you don't need all of the things that it's doing, shut them off, because you're going to get low power mode. You'll get hours more of your phone if you can deal with it. It's not just a couple minutes.
To turn on low power mode on an iPhone, you can do it through Control Center. If you open Control Center, it looks like a battery, and it actually has like a halfway indicator. So that's one way you can turn it on. You can also turn it on in system settings, I believe.
Settings, battery.
There's
toggle for it.
Yeah.
What it turns off is on iPhones 12s and 13s, it turns off 5G. On newer iPhones, it'll leave it on, but I think it turns off millimeter wave maybe. It will default auto lock to 30 seconds. So it will make it, instead of your phone, like you might have it set for 5 minutes normally for your screen to turn off and your unlock, and it'll just change that to be 30 seconds. It will keep the display brightness from peaking up as high. It will limit the refresh rate to 60 hertz if you have ProMotion. It will basically turn ProMotion off. Certain visual effects, like some of the transition effects and stuff as you swipe around, I don't even notice them. I honestly don't even notice what it's turned off.
Well, you would notice them if they were off, because it's very like they're subtle. But when you turn them off, you can tell. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not the end of the world, but you'll notice it.
Yep. Uploading and downloading iCloud photos, uploading and downloading apps, updates, email fetch, and background app refreshing, apps that update themselves in the background.
That's
that stuff
the biggest
will be
thing.
turned off.
Like, for example, weather. If you check your weather, it'll be the temperature from like an hour ago, and you'll have to go into the app. It'll refresh, and then
once you launch the app. So instead of just
if you have a widget or something,
it does make your phone's battery last a lot longer.
A lot.
So yeah, that's exactly what it's for. Is either when you're, oh my God, I'm at 10% and I need to make sure my phone's on in case I get that text for the next 3 hours and I can't charge up. But also just if you're at 40% and you know this is not going to last me all day and I can't get to a charger, low power mode. It's not like it just completely cripples your phone.
Yeah.
Right.
When I'm on vacation and I know I'm going to be taking a lot of photos and videos, and I know I'm not going to need those other services, I just be on low powered mode all day long.
Oh yeah.
It's more important for me to record the events and the sites that I'm seeing than it is to get an email. So
hey, I mean, you don't even want those distractions.
Right.
Yeah.
Like this is it's doing you a favor.
Yeah.
But it's not going to do anything like stop you from getting text messages or phone calls or anything like that. So it's like it's not I'm going to miss some emergency kind of situation. Go ahead and turn on low power.
Maybe we should wrap this all up with some news about the upcoming iPhone 16 Pro Max. It's reportedly going to get a new battery, and this battery is supposed to be, is it encased in it has a new metal casing?
Yeah, the idea is the current batteries, if you were to open up your iPhone, they have sort of this black foil casing on the outside, and it'll be a metal casing, and it will not be glued in with glue strips. It will be almost like it's like a electronic lock. It's in there, and when the battery needs to be released, a little bit of voltage on these two leads will pop it loose. The idea is to make it easier for the batteries to be replaced. I would say for most of our listeners, that means easier for service professionals. It doesn't make it easier to literally open up your phone, which is the hard part. But you don't have to like take tweezers and pull off these two strips of like adhesive anymore. And then like if the strip breaks, which they do all the time, you have to like use a special like heat gun to like the whole. Yeah.
Apple sells a self-service repair kit, and it's literally like this big giant thing, and it heats it up, and you can remove it, and it's a whole process. Yeah. This is in response to a lot of EU stuff. Still, basically everything Apple's doing, iOS 18, App Store, all that stuff is all in response to the EU. This is different than the Digital Rights Act, but it's all these rules and regulations that are passed to make it easier to. Yeah,
this is similar to the one where they forced them to use USB-C as opposed to, I think it's part of that bill, but at a certain date, they have to be, the batteries have to be user replaceable without any exotic tools or something like that. And there's exceptions that Apple probably qualifies for anyway, but this is a good thing to do. I think all their service professionals are asking them to do this stuff anyway.
Yeah.
Because the limit is something like 80% of charge after 500 cycles or something, which they already say they exceed. So you could have a sealed battery in something like that.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if that's going to provide longer battery life or affect the battery health in general, but
there's been reports that maybe 10%.
Yeah.
There's
that
all
is
this
something
tech kind of floating around.
Yeah, we know Apple is continuously looking at ways to make the battery longevity last long, right? Without compromising the phone, but that there's so many, there's a million suppliers they have to deal with and engineering it. There's so many things that go into it, battery chemistries and stuff, but they do want your battery to hold more charge over more cycles.
Yeah, and they do a great job, probably better than any other phone maker, of making it last for X number of years, despite the conversation we had about my battery health is at 92%. If I kept this phone, I'm pretty certain it would, in 3 years, it would be, fine.
If they didn't show you that number, you probably wouldn't have any idea.
Right.
You probably would just be like,
no
it lasts as long as it did when it was brand new. And maybe it does. Yeah.
Blissful ignorance.
Yeah.
Well, that number also just may not exactly be, like, when you say 90%, like, does that mean it lasts 10% longer every day? Maybe not exactly. Like,
yeah, I don't 10% feels like it would be a lot. Like, I don't notice it. I don't notice that in the slightest.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a 1-to-1 ratio of battery health versus longevity.
Yeah.
But I guess it's that much closer to reaching that 80% mark. And one more just to cap this whole thing off. Apple does have a battery replacement program from the iPhone XS and up, so 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. It costs $89 and they'll give you a brand new battery. XR, 10R down to iPhone 5, it'll cost you $69. So that's pretty good. If you want to keep your old phone, you can get a brand new battery if yours is not working properly, if it's draining quicker, if whatever the reason. It's relatively affordable. And if you have Apple Care, obviously it's $0.
If there's an Apple store near you, they can do it kind of while you wait. Like, it's like that day.
Yeah.
It's not like, I'm going to be without my phone for days. It's like, drop it off.
It's fast. I don't know about the iPhone 5 if you have one of those, but certainly a newer one.
No. Yeah. And especially since the iPhone 14 and 15 non-Pro models, they really changed the way that they get into the phone itself from both sides and stuff. That makes both display and battery replacements a lot easier for the service professionals.
Yeah. It's quick. Even back, I remember going, I don't know, I had like an iPhone 6 or 7, and it's like back then it was like an hour. It's probably longer now, but it's quick.
Well, that does it for this episode of the Macworld Podcast, episode 891. Thanks to Jason Cross.
Thank you.
Thanks to Michael Simon.
Thank you, sir.
And thanks to you, the audience. Thank you for tuning in. You can subscribe to the Macworld Podcast in the podcast app, on Spotify, or through any other podcast app. If you have any comments or questions, send us an email at podcast@macworld.com or contact us through X, that's @Macworld, on Threads, that's @Macworld_HQ, or on the Macworld Facebook page. Join us in the next episode of the Macworld Podcast as we talk about the latest in the world of Apple. See you next time.